Good day, everyone. This is your captain speaking. In today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a man that many consider one of the most evil and depraved individuals to ever walk the earth. A man who has inspired countless tales, both of horror and of glory. So sharpen your blades and send up a prayer, because today we're delving into the history of Vlad the Impaler to discover the man behind the myth. Vlad III of Wallachia was born sometime between the years of 1428 and 1431 into the houses of Dracula and Basarab as the second son of Vlad II Dracula. Though the exact year of his birth is uncertain, it is believed that he would have been born sometime after 1429 when his father was settled in Transylvania. The historian Radu Florescu wrote in Dracula, Prince of Many Faces, His Life and Times, co-authored with Raymond T. McNally and published in 1989, that Vlad III was born in Sigishora, a town of Transylvanian Saxon origins in what was, at the time, the Kingdom of Hungary, where his father lived from 1431 to 1435. The identity of his mother is a matter of some conjecture, with many historians speculating that she was either the daughter or kinswoman of Alexander the Good, who was Voivode of Moldavia from the year 1400 to the year 1432, or that she was Vlad Dracula's first wife, a woman of unknown name and origins. Vlad Dracula had 4 siblings, one older brother named Mircea II, 2 younger brothers named Radu III, also known as Radu the Fair, and Vlad IV, known as Vlad the Monk, who was a bastard child of Vlad Dracula. And finally, he had a younger sister named Alexandra of Wallachia. The first written reference to Vlad III is in a charter issued on the 20th of January 1437, where he is mentioned alongside his elder brother Mircea, where they are named as the firstborn sons of Vlad II Dracula. In 1442, following a defeat at the hands of John Hunyadi, the Voivode of Transylvania, Sultan Murad II of the Ottoman Empire ordered his sworn vassal, Vlad II Dracula, to meet him at Gallipoli, to demonstrate that he was still loyal to the Sultan. Vlad Dracula had, after a meeting with Hunyadi, refrained from sending his forces into Hungary to aid the invading Ottomans. Vlad II took his sons Vlad III and Radu with him to the meeting, and the 3 of them were imprisoned. Before the year was out, Vlad II Dracula was released from custody, but his sons were to remain as prisoners of the empire to secure his continued obedience. They were held at the fortress of Egregus, known in the modern day as Dolgrugus, and in the year 1444 their lives were put in jeopardy when their father lent his support to King Vladislav III of Poland and Hungary to crusade against the Ottomans. The effort, now known as the Crusade of Varna, was called forth by Pope Eugenius IV and saw the combined efforts of Poland, Hungary, Croatia, Lithuania, Serbia, Bohemia, Wallachia, Bosnia, Burgundy, Venetia, Ragusa, Roma, rebels from Bulgaria, and the Teutonic Knights to face off against the Ottoman Empire in the Balkans. Culminating at the Battle of Varna on November 10, 1444, the Crusaders under the command of King Vladislav III, John Hunyadi, and Mircea II Dracula were defeated by the army commanded by Murad II, who was no longer the acting Sultan of the Ottoman Empire at the time, though both sides suffered heavy losses. Vlad Dracula was certain that his sons would be murdered for his actions, but neither Vlad nor Radu came to any harm as a result of his act of insurrection. During the Crusade of Varna, as previously stated, Murad II, who had commanded the Ottoman forces, had not been the Sultan of the empire, being replaced by his son Mehmed II. However, in 1446, he once again reclaimed the position of Sultan and forced Vlad II to renew his oath of fealty to him. In addition, Vlad now had to pay a yearly tribute to the Sultan. After this, Vlad III and Radu were allowed to return home to Wallachia. In 1447, John Hunyadi, who is now regent governor of Hungary, invaded Wallachia. In the invasion, Vlad II Dracula and his eldest son Mircea were both killed. Vlad Dracula managed to escape the battle, but was captured sometime later and executed. Mircea had his eyes burned out with hot pokers, and was then buried alive. In place of Vlad II, Hunyadi placed Vladislav II, son of Vlad II's cousin Dan II, as Voivode of Wallachia. Vlad III and Radu, according to the contemporary Byzantine historian Michael Kritobolos, fled back to the Ottoman Empire to seek asylum with Sultan Murad II. In September 1448, John Hunyadi and Vladislav II launched an invasion of the Ottoman Empire. Seizing the opportunity, Vlad III led his own army of Ottomans into Wallachia in October to reclaim his father's throne. Hunyadi and Vladislav were defeated by the Ottomans at the Battle of Kosovo on the 17th and 18th of October 1448. Following this, Nicholas Vizaknai, who was a high-ranking official under Hunyadi, sent word to Vlad III, beseeching him to come to Hungary to meet with him. Vlad refused. When Vladislav returned to Wallachia with the remains of his army, Vlad was once again forced to flee back to the Ottomans in December of 1448. During his exile from Wallachia, Vlad settled for a time in Edirne, within the borders of the Ottoman Empire. From there, he went to Moldavia, where his father's brother-in-law Bogdan II had taken the throne, with Hunyadi's support. However, in October of 1451, Bogdan II was assassinated by Peter III Aaron, a bastard son of Alexander the Good, the latter of whom was, possibly, Vlad's grandfather on his mother's side. Following the murder of his uncle Bogdan, Vlad and Bogdan's son Stefan III, later known as Stefan the Great, fled from Moldavia to Transylvania to seek aid from John Hunyadi. Vlad sought to settle in Brasov, but Hunyadi forbade the burghers of the city from giving him shelter in February of 1452. Vlad returned to Moldavia, where Alexander II had dethroned Peter III Aaron and taken up the position of Voivode of Moldavia. The events of his life between his return to Moldavia and the 3rd of July 1456 are almost completely unknown. Sometime in early to mid-1456, Vlad invaded Wallachia with support from Hungary. During the invasion, Vladislav II was killed, and Vlad Dracula once again became Voivode of Wallachia. His first decree as Voivode was to declare to the burghers of Brasov that he would defend and protect them in the event of an Ottoman invasion of Transylvania. In return, he asked for their assistance in case the Ottomans were to invade Wallachia. Launikos Chalkokondailis, a Byzantine Greek historian, reported in his chronicles that hundreds or even thousands of people were executed on Vlad's orders at the start of his reign. Those executed were the ones who participated in the murders of his father and brother, and those he suspected of plotting against him. Any properties, goods, or wealth belonging to those he executed, he redistributed to his most loyal retainers. However, with only 2 exceptions, his list of counselors was constantly changing. During the early years of his reign, Vlad III continued his father's yearly tributes to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. When John Hunyadi died on the 11th of August 1456, his eldest son Ladislav Hunyadi took his place as Voivode of Transylvania. Ladislav accused Vlad Dracula of holding no loyalty to King Ladislav V of Hungary, who was 16 years old at the time, and ordered the burghers of Brasov to instead lend their support to Dan III of Wallachia, the brother of the late Vladislav III of Wallachia, whom Vlad had deposed. In the town of Sibiu, the burghers lent their support to Vlad's illegitimate younger brother, Vlad IV Kalugaru, or Vlad the Monk, who took possession of Amlash, a region within Transylvania customarily ruled by the Voivode of Wallachia. On the 16th of March, 1457, Ladislav Hunyadi was executed on the orders of King Ladislav V of Hungary, resulting in his mother and uncle inciting a rebellion against the king. In the turmoil of the Hungarian Civil War, Vlad aided Stefan, son of Bogdan of Moldavia, in retaking his father's throne. Vlad also raided the towns of Brasov and Sibiu in Transylvania. This is the first time accounts of Vlad impaling his victims appear in the historical record. The Transylvanian Saxons claimed that he took a number of men, women, and children from a Saxon village in Transylvania back to Wallachia and had them all impaled on pikes. The Transylvanian Saxons were loyal to the King of Hungary, and Vlad's attacks on them only aided the rebels in their efforts. At the end of the Civil War, John Hunyadi's son Matthias Corvinus was elected by Parliament as the new King of Hungary at the age of 14, with his uncle Michael Szilágyi as regent. Vlad sent representatives to participate in the peace talks between the Transylvanian Saxons and Szilágyi, whom Vlad later referred to as his lord and elder brother. During the peace talks, the burghers of Brasov agreed to exile Dan III of Wallachia from their town and withdraw their support of him. Also during these talks, Vlad promised the people of Sibiu that they would be free to buy and sell their goods in Wallachia, as long as his own people were extended the same courtesy in Transylvania. King Matthias Corvinus ordered the people of Sibiu to keep the peace with Vlad in 1458. Also in 1458, Michael Szilágyi gave permission to a boyar named Michael, who had been an official of Vladislav II of Wallachia, as well as several others, to settle in Transylvania. Shortly after, Vlad had Michael the boyar murdered. On September 20th, 1459, Vlad began styling himself as Vlad III, lord and ruler of all Wallachia, and the duchies of Amlash and Fagarash. In May of 1459, Vlad Dracula invited the burghers of Brasov to send merchants and craftsmen to Wallachia for trade. However, by the end of the year, his relationship with the Transylvanian Saxons had greatly deteriorated. The reason for this rapid decline in the relationship between Vlad and the Transylvanian Saxons is unknown. But many scholars theorize that it was due to Vlad putting into effect strong protectionist border policies, forbidding the merchants and traders from entering Wallachia, instead forcing them to sell their goods to Wallachian merchants at the border with added border fares, though none of these reasons are documented, and therefore this cannot be considered any more than speculation. Sometime later, the Transylvanian Saxons confiscated a load of steel that a Wallachian merchant had purchased in Brasov, refusing to reimburse him for the loss or refund his money. In response, Vlad attacked the Transylvanian Saxon merchants, torturing them. This event was detailed in a letter written by Basarab III, son of Dan II of Wallachia, who had settled in Sigashora and attempted to lay claim to Wallachia. Dan III, who had previously been supported by the burghers of Brasov, invaded Wallachia. But by the 22nd of April, 1560, Vlad had defeated and executed him. In retaliation for the attack, Vlad invaded Transylvania, laying waste to Brasov. He then ordered that all men and women captured were to be impaled, earning him the title of Vlad Tepes, or Vlad the Impaler. Peace was restored with Brasov sometime during July 1460. Vlad then invaded the region surrounding Amlash and Fagarash on the 24th of August to punish the inhabitants for their support of Dan III during his invasion of Wallachia. Sometime later, it is recorded by Konstantin Mikhailovich, a janissary in the army of Sultan Mehmed II, that Vlad refused to pay the yearly tribute owed to the Sultan. Likewise, the Venetian traveler Giovanni Maria degli Angelelli wrote that Vlad refused to pay said tribute for 3 consecutive years. It should be noted, however, that both records were written decades after the described events supposedly took place. Tursun Bey, one of the Sultan's secretaries, wrote that Vlad had refused to pay the tribute in 1461 when Mehmed was away on an expedition in Trebizond. According to Tursun, Vlad had begun negotiations with King Matthias Corvinus during this time. The Sultan's spies discovered this disloyalty and reported it back to him. Mehmed then sent his envoy, Thomas Katabalinos, to Vlad, requesting that he meet with him in Constantinople, or Istanbul as it is now known. Mehmed also sent word to Hamza Bey at Nicopolis to capture Vlad as soon as he had crossed the Danube into Ottoman territory. Vlad discovered the Sultan's plot and had both Katabalinos and Hamza Bey captured and executed, along with their retinue of Ottoman soldiers. Vlad then gathered his army and marched to the fortress of Giurgiu. They had taken the uniforms of the slain Turks accompanying Hamza Bey and wore them as disguises. Once Vlad and his men had reached the gates of Giurgiu, he ordered the commander to open the gates, speaking to him in perfect fluent Turkish. The commander, believing them to be allies, did as ordered, and Vlad's army captured the fortress with ease, slaughtering every Ottoman soldier stationed within its walls. From Giurgiu, he launched an invasion of the Ottoman Empire, sacking and burning strongholds all along the Danube. On the 11th of February, 1462, Vlad sent a letter to King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, informing him of his military action against the Ottomans. In the letter, he claimed that 23,884 Turks and Bulgarians had been put to death on his orders over the course of the campaign, and requested military aid from the king, claiming that he had broken all ties with the Sultan for the honor of the king and the Holy Crown of Hungary, and for the preservation of Christianity and the strengthening of the Catholic faith. When Mehmed learned of Vlad's invasion, he raised an army of over 150,000 strong with which to invade Wallachia. He promised Radu, Vlad's brother, that he would make him the new voivode once he had removed Vlad from the throne. This event goes against several historians' speculation that Mehmed intended to occupy Wallachia with his army, hence the grand size of the force gathered for the attack. In truth, Mehmed only wished to remove the disloyal Vlad and place a new submissive ruler on the throne of Wallachia. On the 4th of June, 1462, a contingent of Janissaries went ashore after being repelled by archers during an attempted landing at Vidin. Konstantin Mikhailovich, the Serbian-born Janissary, recorded their battle against Vlad on the banks of the Danube as thus, quote, "When night began, we climbed into our boats and floated down the Danube and crossed over to the other side several miles below where Vlad's army was stationed. There, we dug ourselves trenches so that the cavalry could not harm us. After that, we crossed back over to the other side and transported other Janissaries over the Danube. And when the entire infantry had crossed over, then we prepared and set out gradually against Vlad's army, together with the artillery and other equipment that we had brought with us. Having halted, we set up the cannon, but not in time to stop 300 Janissaries from being killed. Seeing that our side was greatly weakening, we defended ourselves with the 120 guns that we brought over and fired so often that we repelled the prince's army and greatly strengthened our position. Vlad, seeing that he could not prevent the crossing, withdrew. After that, the Sultan crossed over the Danube with his entire army and gave us 30,000 coins to distribute among us." End quote. Vastly outnumbered by the invading Ottoman army, Vlad implemented a scorched earth policy as he retreated toward his capital at Targovishta. His tactics included hit-and-run guerrilla strikes, as well as biological attacks consisting of sending released prisoners and commoners afflicted with terminal infectious diseases such as leprosy, tuberculosis, and even the Black Plague to mingle with the Ottoman forces, spreading the diseases among the army to thin their ranks and slow their advance. Further methods of biological warfare included the poisoning of water sources with animal carcasses. Vlad and his men also diverted the flow of small streams and rivers to create artificial marshlands that would be difficult for the Ottoman army to march through. They also dug pits, which they filled with spikes and covered with timber and leaves to lay traps for the advancing army. His people and their livestock were evacuated into the mountains for safety, and the Ottoman army marched for 7 days without a source of food or fresh water, causing them to suffer greatly from starvation, fatigue, and dehydration. The Ottomans attempted to seize the fortresses at Bucharest and the island of Snagov, but failed to capture either one. Following these failures, they pressed on toward Targovishta. On the 17th of June, 1462, Mehmed and his army were camped south of Vlad's capital at Targovishta. That day, Vlad reportedly entered the Ottoman camp disguised as a Turk, scouting the location of the Sultan's personal tent. That night, with a force numbering 24,000 men, Vlad attacked the camp, intending to capture or kill Mehmed. The battle would last from 3 hours after sunset to around 4 in the morning. During the battle, Vlad attempted to find and kill Mehmed, but entered the wrong tent, instead finding Mahmud Pasha and Ishak Pasha, the Sultan's grand viziers. The number killed in the battle varies by source, with some claiming that the Wallachian attack did little damage to the Ottoman forces, while others state that the Ottomans suffered heavy losses. Some historians estimate that the Wallachian casualties number around 5,000, while the Ottoman losses range between 10 and 15,000. The exact number is unknown. Following the night attack at Targovishta, Vlad's brother Radu sent emissaries to villages raided by Vlad, seeking more allies while the Sultan moved to besiege Targovishta. Radu and his allies chased Vlad, eventually making their way to Kurta de Argesh, where legend states that Vlad's first wife, often attributed the name of Anastasia, stated by some sources to be Anastasia Holsanska, the niece of the King of Poland, took her own life. The reasons given for her suicide are varied, ranging from her throwing herself out of a window into the Argesh River rather than be taken prisoner by Radu and the Ottomans, to hearing a rumor that Vlad had been killed in the night attack, to learning that Vlad had been having an affair with a 17-year-old mistress named Katarina, whom he intended to marry. The real reason for her suicide is unknown. However, the former reason seems, to my reckoning, to be the far more likely candidate. Near the end of June, Mehmed and his army reached the city of Targovishta, finding it deserted and empty, save for a forest of the impaled lining the road. Among the 20,000 dead was Hamza Pasha, one of Mehmed's viziers, who was placed on a stake higher than the rest to signify his high rank. He was dressed in his best gear to show proper respect to the Sultan. The rest were Ottoman soldiers and Muslim peasants who had been living in the area. Chalco Kandili's description of the scene is as follows, quote, "The Sultan's army entered into the area of the impalements, which were 17 stades long and 7 stades wide. There were large stakes there on which, as it is said, about 20,000 men, women, and children had been spitted, quite a sight for the Turks and the Sultan himself. The Sultan was seized with amazement, and said that it was not possible to deprive of his country a man who had done such great deeds, who had such a diabolical understanding of how to govern his realm and its people. And he said that a man who had done such things was worth much. The rest of the Turks were dumbfounded when they saw the multitude of men on the stakes. There were infants too, affixed to their mothers on the stakes, and birds had made their nests in their entrails." End quote. Mehmed's army retreated back to Brela, and Stefan III of Moldavia advanced to Kilia in what is now Ukraine to capture the fortress there. Vlad gave chase to Stefan, leaving behind a force of 6,000 men to try and slow the Sultan's army. However, these 6,000 were defeated. Stefan III was wounded at Kilia and forced to retreat before Vlad arrived, though 7,000 Wallachians aided in repelling the attack. The main Ottoman army withdrew from Wallachia, taking with them many slaves and over 200,000 head of horses and cattle. Vlad's brother Radu and his troops remained behind. From his camp, Radu sent messages out to remind the Wallachians that the Sultan could, at any time, return and invade them again. Vlad and Radu engaged in 2 battles over the following months, both of which were victories for Vlad's army. Vlad then moved his army into the Carpathian Mountains, hoping to receive aid from Matthias Corvinus in Hungary. However, the Transylvanian Saxons had been encouraged to throw their support behind Radu. Radu had also made offers to the burghers of Brasov to give them commercial privileges and pay them 15,000 ducats in reparations if they would side with him against Vlad. The negotiations between Vlad and Matthias Corvinus lasted for weeks, starting in November of 1462. In the end, Matthias would refuse to aid Vlad, as he had no desire to fight a war against the Ottoman Empire. When Vlad returned to Wallachia, he was captured by Czech mercenary commander Jan Jiskra of Brandis. Pope Pius II had sent money to help finance Vlad's war against the Ottomans, and in order to provide an explanation for the imprisonment of Vlad, who had papal support, Matthias presented 3 letters that were, according to him, written by Vlad to be sent to Sultan Mehmed II's Grand Vizier Mahmud Pasha and Stefan the Great of Moldavia. In these letters, Vlad, quote-unquote, offered to join forces with the Ottomans once more and aid them in an invasion of Hungary if they would restore him to the throne of Wallachia. Most historians agree that these letters were forgeries intended to give valid reasons for Vlad's imprisonment in the eyes of the papacy. According to Antonio Bonfini, a member of Matthias Corvinus's court, a true reason for Vlad's imprisonment was never given by the king. Vlad was first imprisoned in Alba Iulia, which was at the time known as Belgrade. He was then moved to Visegrad, where he remained for 14 years. No records of his life between 1462 and 1475 are known to have survived into the modern day. In mid-1475, Stefan the Great sent word to Matthias Corvinus asking that he send Vlad home to Wallachia to wage war against Basarab the Old, who had sworn fealty to the Ottoman Empire. Stefan the Great reportedly wanted to secure Wallachia under a ruler who was a known enemy of the Turks. Also in 1475, Matthias Corvinus officially recognized Vlad III Dracula as lawful and rightful prince of Wallachia, but refused to lend him military aid in reclaiming his principality. Meanwhile, Mehmed II recognized Basarab the Old as the lawful ruler of Wallachia. Vlad settled in Transylvania in June of 1475, in Sibiu. Corvinus ordered the burghers of Sibiu to give Vlad 200 gold florins from the royal revenues on the 21st of September, but Vlad left Transylvania for Buda in October. From Buda, he then crossed over the Danube into Pest, where he lived in a house that became known as Dracula Haza, or Dracula's house. There is an apocryphal story involving the house that claims that while chasing a thief, soldiers broke into Vlad's home, where the thief attempted to hide. According to the story, Vlad had the commander of the soldiers executed for failing to ask his permission before entering the house. In the spring of 1476, Matthias Corvinus would send Vlad Dracula and Serbian nobleman Vuk Gregorović to fight against the Ottomans in Bosnia. Vlad and Gregorović raided several Ottoman fortresses between the months of February and March of that year. During this campaign, Vlad once more exhibited his skill and tendency for shock and terror tactics, impaling captured Turks en masse and slaughtering the civilians of occupied towns. As a result, his forces all but destroyed the settlements of Srebrenica, Kuslat, and Zvornik. In the summer of 1476, Mehmed II invaded Moldavia and defeated Stefan the Great at the Battle of Valea Alba on the 26th of July. Shortly after, in August, Vlad Dracula and Stefan Bathory led their forces into Moldavia, forcing the Sultan to lift the siege of the citadel of Targu Neamț. On September the 6th, Matthias Corvinus ordered the Transylvanian Saxons to aid Stefan Bathory in his planned invasion of Wallachia against Basarab the Old. Stefan the Great of Moldavia would also send forces into Wallachia to aid in the defeat of Basarab. Vlad, who was staying in Brasov at the time, promised the burghers there commercial privileges, and after ceremonially affirming his alliance with Stefan the Great, marched into Wallachia, capturing and occupying Bucharest. Meanwhile, the Bathory forces captured Targovishta. This forced Basarab the Old to flee and seek refuge with the Ottomans. Secure in his victory, Vlad sent word to Brasov, informing the burghers of said victory and inviting them to come to Wallachia. He was crowned Prince of Wallachia sometime before the 26th of November of that same year. Vlad III Dracula died in either late December 1476 or early January 1477 near Snagov, north of Bucharest, slain in battle against invading Ottomans who were supporting Basarab's attempt to retake Wallachia. He was between 45 and 49 years old at the time of his death. His body was reported to have been dismembered by the Ottomans, and his head was sent to Mehmed II in Constantinople. It is rumored to now be buried beneath Voivode Street in Karaköy, Istanbul, Turkey. His body, according to Wallachian sources, was discovered in a swamp by priests from the monastery near Snagov, who buried it beneath the floors of the monastery. This is only legend, however. The space beneath the tombstone attributed to Vlad Tepes was excavated in 1933, and no tomb or human remains were found, only the bones of horses. The true resting place of Vlad III Dracula's remains is unknown to this day. He was survived by his second wife, Justina Silagi, and his son from his first marriage, Mina, who was dubbed Minha the Evil by his father's enemies. Vlad III Dracula's penchant for brutality was well documented during his lifetime, with Pope Pius II including them in his commentaries, and Meistersinger Michel Beheim composing a poem of them titled In My Butchering of Middle German, von einem Wutzlig der heißt Dracula Weide von der Wallachei, or The Story of a Despot Called Dracula, Voivode of Wallachia, the latter of which was performed in the court of Holy Roman Emperor Vienna Neustadt in the winter of 1463. According to Beheim, in an apocryphal tale, Vlad once impaled 2 monks in order to assist them in getting to heaven. When their donkey began braying at its master's death, Vlad had it impaled too. As stated, this tale is apocryphal, and the veracity of it is dubious at best. Whilst Vlad was imprisoned in Hungary, a rumor was documented that Vlad would catch and kill rats and mice, cut them into small pieces, or impale them on small slivers of wood because he could not, quote, forget his wickedness, end quote. Yet another anecdote that cannot be confirmed is that when the Ottomans sent envoys to Vlad's court, they refused to remove their turbans due to customs. In response, Vlad had their turbans nailed to their heads to aid them in never breaking said customs. German stories about Vlad Dracula describe him as being a demented psychopath, a sadist, a gruesome murderer, and a masochist, and as also being worse than both Nero and Caligula. Though it should be noted that these accounts were published after his death, and possibly stemmed from his long history of conflict with Transylvanian Saxons. Books detailing Vlad's cruelty were widely published following his death, and often included woodcuts depicting Vlad in various settings, often in the midst of acts of barbarism. One such image comes from a book published in 1499 in Nuremberg, and again in Strasbourg in 1500, which depicts Vlad seated at a dining table surrounded by people impaled on stakes. Again, these depictions are apocryphal and should be taken with a grain of salt. There is an old southern Slavic work known as the Tale about Voivode Dracula, which was originally written sometime between 1482 and 1486, which contains 19 anecdotes about Vlad Dracula, some of which were later incorporated into stories about Ivan IV Vasilievich, the first Tsar of Russia, commonly known as Ivan the Terrible. Even without these fictional tales of cruelty, Vlad Dracula, by today's standards, would be considered at the very least a war criminal. However, even with this in mind, he is still considered by many to be one of the greatest rulers in Romanian history, and is considered by many to be a national hero of Romania, though there are also many who reject this view. Vlad's common title, the Impaler, is simple enough to understand. However, many get the meaning of the name Dracula incorrect, claiming that it means son of the devil, when in fact at the time it meant son of the dragon, in reference to his father, Vlad II Dracula, whose name meant Vlad the Dragon. Vlad II Dracula earned this title due to his association with the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order founded by Sigismund of Luxembourg in 1408, who was King of Hungary and Croatia from 1387 to 1437, and Holy Roman Emperor from 1433 to 1437. Fashioned after the various military orders of the Crusades, the Order of the Dragon required all of its initiates to defend Christianity against the Ottoman Empire. This misconception stems from the root of the word Dracula coming from the Romanian word drac, which at the time meant dragon but has come to mean devil. The word drac descended from the Latin word draco, meaning dragon, which in turn descended from the ancient Greek word drakon, also meaning dragon or serpent. The translation to son of the devil is also closely linked with Bram Stoker's iconic 1897 novel Dracula, where Abraham Van Helsing makes several references to Dracula being the devil or receiving his powers from the devil. And while many consider Vlad the Impaler to be the inspiration for the character of Dracula, there are many inconsistencies between the historical figure and the character as portrayed in the novel. The Count in the novel claims to be of Seke origins. He also claims to be descended from Attila the Hun, unlike the real Vlad Dracula. Furthermore, during the writing process of the novel, Dracula was simply referred to as Count Vampire until the final drafts when Stoker replaced the name with Vlad III's nickname, Dracula. His writing notes also contain 0 references to the historical figure of Vlad Tepes. He does, however, mention in chapter 3 of the novel that, quote, one of his race, as voivode, fought the Turks and crossed the Danube to defeat them on their own soil. He also claims that this same Dracula inspired another of his line who, quote, in a later age again and again, brought his forces over the great river into Turkey land, who when he was beaten back came again and again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph, end quote. In chapter 18, Van Helsing, referencing a letter from his friend Arminius, says, quote, "He must indeed be that Voivode Dracula who won his name against the Turk, over the great river on the very frontier of Turkey land." End quote. However, in contradiction to this, in chapter 25, Van Helsing, Mina, and others link Count Dracula to that other of his race, analyzing his behavioral tendency to retreat back across water to rest in the native soil of his homeland after a defeat in order to recover and regroup for another attempt. Just as that unnamed Dracula from a later age fled back to Transylvania from Ottoman lands across the Danube, so too does the Count flee back across the ocean from London. This, if taken at face value, would make the Count a descendant of Vlad Dracula, and not Vlad Dracula himself, though the discrepancies in his lineage and Vlad Dracula's lineage remain. The location of Castle Dracula is never stated in the novel, with Stoker using vague imagery to relay the setting, and the only references to a geographical location come in chapter 26, when Jonathan Harker writes in his journal that they, quote, "took it that somewhere about the 47th degree north of latitude would be the place chosen for crossing the country between the river and the Carpathians," end quote. Many have misinterpreted this to mean that the castle is located in this area, placing it near Borgo Pass, when in reality, it simply means that this was the location the Count's men chose to enter into Transylvanian territory. Another theory, posed by author Hans Cornel de Roos, posited that Stoker had intended for a vacant mountaintop in the Chalamani Mountains, a volcanic system of the Carpathians located in Transylvania, roughly 20 miles southeast of Borgo Pass, to be the location of Castle Dracula. Erroneously, since 1997, Bran Castle, located 25 miles southeast of Brașov, Romania, has been marketed to tourists as the quote-unquote real Castle Dracula. However, Bran Castle is never once mentioned within the novel. While Vlad Dracula at times used Bran Castle as a temporary residence, it lies more than 100 kilometers removed from the general location of Castle Dracula in the novel. Ponari Castle, likewise, is not a viable candidate for the exact same reasons, though it is often considered to be the real Castle Dracula due to its use by Vlad Tepes as his home. There is a hotel, Castel Dracula, located in Piatra Fontanella, within the Borgo Pass, that claims to have been built upon the exact location selected by Stoker for Castle Dracula. However, it is actually located near the assumed location that Jonathan Harker was picked up by the Count's servants upon his arrival in the area in Chapter 1. Despite the discrepancies and tenuous evidence to support it, the connection between Count Dracula and Vlad Dracula in the hearts and minds of the world remains strong, so much so that there have been numerous attempts to correct this perceived mistake by Stoker, such as in the manga and subsequent anime series Helsing and Helsing Ultimate, written by Hirano Kota, the 1992 film Bram Stoker's Dracula, starring English actor Gary Oldman as Vlad Dracula, the 2000 American film Dark Prince: The True Story of Dracula, the light novel Fate Apocrypha, and the 2014 action horror film Dracula Untold, starring Welsh actor Luke Evans as Vlad III Dracula. Depictions of Dracula as a vampire in film began in 1921 with the lost film Dracula's Death, where he was portrayed by Eric Vanko. Then, the following year, the silent film Nosferatu, starring Max Schreck as Count Orlok, a version of Dracula that had to be renamed for legal purposes. However, it would be in the 1931 film Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi, that the modern image of Dracula would be cemented. Following in the footsteps of the 1931 classic, no less than 110 films and series would be made depicting the vampire known as Count Dracula, from the Hammer horror films starring the late Sir Christopher Lee, to the 1992 film Bram Stoker's Dracula starring Gary Oldman, to Van Helsing and Blade Trinity in 2004, Hotel Transylvania and its sequels, to the Castlevania series of games and anime. Vlad the Impaler, presented in a more historically accurate setting, has been portrayed several times as well. From the 1979 Romanian film Vlad Tepes, starring Stefan Silanu, to the second season of the Turkish docudrama series Rise of Empires Ottoman, where Vlad is portrayed by Romanian actor Daniel Nuta. The series presents Vlad's story from his childhood as a hostage of the Ottoman Empire through the night attack at Targovishte in 1462, putting great emphasis and focus on his personal relationship with Sultan Mehmed II. Whatever version of Dracula you prefer, the historical ruler known for his brutal tactics, or the suave, seductive vampire, or somewhere in between, one thing is for certain. Vlad III Dracula, the Impaler, will live on in our hearts, minds, and the annals of history forever. Thank you all for watching. This has been another episode of Man Behind the Myth. Once again, I am your host, Captain Crow's Eye. Leave a like and a comment if the mood strikes you, and by the will of God, I'll see you all next time. Farewell.